Thank you. So everybody, welcome. I'm Cedric and I'm founder of TAKE07. We call ourselves Strange Birds, filming crazy cinematic content with FPV drones. And I'm gonna show you some FPV things and learn you more about FPV and cinematic FPV in the coming 15 minutes. FPV, for most of you, you are aware of what it is, but for those who doesn't know what FPV means, it's first-person view, meaning that the drone is controlled by the pilot wearing goggles, and the goggles are the image that the drone gets from a camera in front of the drone, which means that the pilot can navigate the drone very accurate and very spectacular. But to give you an example of what FPV is and what the different markets are, I suggest that we look to a little movie to get you introduced.
This is DRL, the Drone Racing League. 12 of the world's best FPV pilots battle each other across the longest, most complex courses ever seen for maximum season points.
Yes, baby!
In their quest to become world champion. This is Drone Racing. This is DRL.
See any human. Lights in there today. Sheesh. Scary.
To these expectations killing me. Wasn't it yesterday that no one cared what I could be? I was cutting glass in that apartment, I would spend my days. Hadn't given up quite yet, I saw a brighter way. Sitting in those classes, mind too distracted. Packing up my things like bye, tomorrow absent. Plugged into my garage band for the rest of the week. Only leaving that apartment to go get something to eat. I was losing myself, trying to fit a mold. I mean the one most of the people in my family hold. That you grow up, go to college, then locked inside of a cell. But the doors are open and they got coffee so you can't tell. That's a nightmare, don't you understand? Fast forward 4 years, my album made 100.
Shaker, rainmaker,
that easy?
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's go. Owen, you're up.
My foot wasn't over the line. Mark an 8, dude.
This is bowling. There are rules. I'm not counting it. Dude, I'm telling you, I bowled a perfect game.
There's no way, man. I've seen you bowl gutter balls all the time.
Well, impressive, wasn't it? As you noticed, I made some categories to show you the different uses of FPV drones. First of all, we had racing, then we had freestyle, aggressive and more smoothly, and finally we had the cinematic use of FPV drones. The last category is the category that we specialize in, but I'm going to tell you the history of FPV. And that started with the FPV racing. Well, back in the days, FPV racing, and it still is a matter of model building. So we assemble drones ourselves, and we tune them, and then we fly them. And that's how radio-controlled builders started with airplanes, and they thought, well, it could be fun having an image from in front of the plane and seeing that through goggles and operate our plane that way. And that's how FPV was invented. And then soon after that they started racing with these drones. That was the first movie that you saw. It was a DLR race, so Drone Racing League, also known from the simulator. And that is really the start of FPV flying, starting with a simulator. Then freestyle. Freestyle has nothing to do with filmmaking. It's only showing off your skills and looking for limits. The first movie that you saw from Mr. Steele, one of the founders of freestyle and also founder of a brand in the FPV parts, his style is very, very aggressive. He likes to show off going through small gaps, making loopings, turning really fast. So that's freestyling. And then came another movie from Le Drip. That's one of the pilots of Rotor Riot, a company in FPV drones. And he has a more smooth style. And that brings us to cinematic. Cinematic FPV filming is using those agile FPV drones for filmmaking, and it allows us to be very creative with the drone and to fly some lines that are almost impossible, but we make the impossible possible. We as TAKE07, we specialize in cinematic FPV. And we use that, or we are asked by filmmakers, commercial makers, video production houses, and television. We work as freelancers, and we use our FPV skills to help them create those very attractive clips in FPV. But besides that, we as TAKE07, we went to the market with on-shelf products. So that means that we are flying in real estate, and the FPV drones allow us to fly a property from the street through the front door, through the house, and we leave the house by one of the roof windows, showing the potential buyer the house itself in a very natural way. On the other hand, we film for employer branding. From a deep market research, we know that the new marketing is all about employer branding. So we help companies in the war for talent. Our FPV drones are used to make very attractive and short clips. Those clips are used by the companies to attract new employees, and they use them foremost on social media platforms. But how to get started in FPV? One of the biggest questions, I think, for drone pilots, because it is an adventure. 2 years ago, I started FPV and I was looking for a product on the shelf, but there was nothing. I already told you that the history of FPV lies in model building and assembling the drones yourself. So where did I have to start? I had no idea. I only had the internet, and eventually I went on YouTube looking for hours and hours and hours. And that's how I started FPV, by watching movies on YouTube and figuring out what the technical differences were between parts, flight controllers, receivers. It was a hell of a job, because there's so much involved in making a drone. But to give you an example of how I started, I'm gonna take you through my history and my evolution in FPV. And maybe, and I hope, that this will be very practical for someone listening and watching to get into FPV in a safe and an easy way, because it has no use buying a drone, a controller and a goggles, not knowing how you can bind one to another and start flying, and after 2 minutes crashing and seeing all your money going into the garbage. So I hope I'm gonna learn you something today on how to get started with FPV. First and foremost, start with simulators. Drone Racing League is one of the simulators that is very good for learning how you control an FPV drone. Because normal drones or consumer drones, they are full with safety things. But that's not the case for FPV drones. They have nothing, no stabilization, no return to home, throttle control, you manage it yourself. So it's quite an experience to learn how to get into FPV. But how did I get started? I started with a tiny whoop. I'm gonna draw some names. Tiny whoop is a very tiny drone, not larger than my hands. And I bought it from the internet, where else, in a bind and fly pack. So I got an analog goggles, I got the drone, and I got a remote. And I could start in my living room flying FPV. That was big fun, but I got bored very fast, and I wanted to be a cinematic FPV pilot. So I was looking for that drone that could make those smooth images. And I end up with a Cinewhoop, one of the names that is very famous in FPV world, Cinewhoop, which means that it is a drone that flies quite stable, but tiny enough to go through small gaps, can fly close to people, props are protected, and I'm gonna show you how I started. I started by buying all those parts, and I ended up with the DJI because I wanted to fly digital. I bought myself digital goggles, I bought myself a controller, and then I went looking for parts. Here is the DJI with camera for the FPV system. We have a flight system, we have motors, there is a balancer, then we have the receiving system. Okay, we have some props, we have batteries, and we have a frame, and all these things had to be assembled. Okay, 1 week later the drone was fully assembled, and I ended up with this drone. It was a hassle because I had to watch different movies on the internet, trying how to solder, how to get the thing attached, and so on. But I ended up with a drone. And then you think, okay, I can go flying, but not in the FPV world. It's not like buying a consumer on the shelf drone by charging the battery, connecting to the goggles, connecting to the remote. No, this drone needed to be tuned, which means that you need to go into the software and you need to tune the drone to get into the air. But eventually, this was my first device that took me into cinematic FPV droning. I had the experience of flying, and I went buying all these other kinds of drones, sub to 50-gram drones, acro drones, so to fly in freestyle. I bought myself a 5-inch, and I ended up buying many drones to start filming. And then you think, okay, he was filming at that moment. No, because that's what I want to learn about FPV. It's a journey, it's an adventure, and you have to learn many things. First of all, I've learned to fly, but then I wanted to make video content, and then you need cameras. Another history of cameras. Not only buying an action camera, but also learning about the settings of the cameras. How many frames per second? What is my shutter speed? Do I need ND filters? What is the stabilization on this camera? Well, it's quite a job to figure it out. How to get that smooth images and smooth videos. But hey, anyway, I mentioned to learn it all by myself, and I ended up by making these fantastic FPV films. But in the end, I think some months ago, or maybe a year ago, the hassle of FPV by making the drones yourself, binding them, getting into the software, tuning them, there was someone named DJI who came up with the DJI FPV, an on-the-shelf FPV device delivered with goggles, with battery, bind and fly. This eventually was, as I know, the first on-the-shelf FPV device. And what? I bought it. I'm quite satisfied of the DJI FPV device, but for me, as a professional FPV pilot, this device is a very good starter. You can fly in different modes, and even in the acro mode, I think it's called manual mode. Even in manual mode, I think this device still has some safeties, or some yeah, it doesn't give me that much confidence as I fly my own made quads. But it's a very good device. I suggest everyone who wants to go into FPV to start even with the DJI device. But if you want to get into FPV, you have to learn a lot. It's not like buying a device on the shelf, getting it into the air and start flying. For me, it was a journey. I enjoyed the journey, but I can imagine that many people want to get into FPV but don't have the time, or don't want to put the effort into getting really deep into the technical details. And that's why maybe I can announce that we are thinking of making a FPV school together with Noordzee Drones, to get those people passionate about drones also into the FPV world. Well, I hope this was a short introduction in the very technical but very satisfying world of FPV. And if there are questions, don't hesitate. I'm here still the time that they give me, but afterwards get in touch with me, and have a nice day, everyone. Thank you for the attention.